Hello, everyone. I am Bernice Jordan, one of the public health program managers at USET. This presentation is under our behavioral health track. Our session will be focusing on regaining native psychological brilliance. I'd like to introduce our presenter, Holly Echohawk. Holly Echohawk is a former tribal and mainstream behavioral health director with 30 years of experience in the administration and development of licensed and accredited mental health and substance abuse treatment services. An author of Tribal Best Practices, Ms. Echohawk has substantial experience consulting with tribal health programs across the United States and serving on the board of directors of the International Initiative for Mental Health Leadership. Ms. Echohawk is a behavioral health subject matter expert with the National Opioid Response Network, the New England Mental Health Technology Transfer Network, and C4 Innovations. She is also employed as a tribal behavioral health subject matter expert with Kaufman and Associates, and in that capacity serves as a content lead for the California Tribal MAT for opioid treatment and best practices for stimulant use treatment for California tribal health clinics. She attended the University of Oklahoma, the University of Texas at Austin, and California School of Professional Psychology. She earned a Master's of Science degree in organizational behavior within a school of psychology. Holly Echohawk is an enrolled member of the Pawnee Nation of Oklahoma and lives in Vancouver, Washington. Also, if you won't mind, please add your email to the chat box. All right, I am going to go ahead and put on to share the screen so you can start. Oops.
Hi, everybody. Hi, I'm Holly Echohawk, and I wish we could all be together in person, but I'm sitting in Vancouver, Washington, which is right across the river from Portland, Oregon. So I'm going to talk today about a really important topic, and I call it regaining or reclaiming native psychological brilliance. So, and I'm going to show you a couple of videos, and I think it's going to be a really positive, and I want to leave you at the end, feeling good, to go on with your day. So the next slide. So this is, as Bernice was saying, I wear several hats and have several jobs. And the one that I'm speaking to you from today is I am the tribal behavioral health specialist for the New England Mental Health Technology Transfer Center, kind of a weird name, MHTTC, but it's a partnership between Yale and these three organizations. And C4 Innovations is a super cool organization. It's in the Boston area. It really focuses, I always call it a social justice organization. It really supports and believes in lived experience, which is unusual for an organization. And it reflects that in the staff. So they're a training and technical assistance organization, which is really a great group. So if you ever want to check it out, you can look on, just type it into your computer and you can read about it. And then the Harvard University Department of Psychiatry is one of the partners as well as the Center for Educational Improvement. So that is the team that I work with, which is really great. And then the next slide is just a disclaimer slide that just says, all's good. And the New England MHTTC team is funded by SAMHSA. And the next slide is one of the things that this group is doing, the New England team is, and actually I should mention that I'm really thrilled to be here for USET, and I love working with USET. And in this role that I have with New England, 1/3 of the USET tribal nations are in the New England states. But the other thing that we do in this role that I have is it really does have a specific reach out to Indigenous, Black, and people of color. Okay, so the next slide. It's just an Indigenous land acknowledgement. And I don't know, where you all, which organizations you all are from. I know most of you are from tribal organizations, but I think it's just really important to always have an Indigenous land acknowledgement. If you work for a non-tribal organization and they're not doing this, feel free to, there's many different kinds of land acknowledgements, but feel free to copy this one and ask your organization to always include it. But it basically is just acknowledging that, of course, we are all standing on ground that Indigenous people, where Indigenous people lived and still live. And it's really important to honor and recognize the tribes and the Native people who lived and on the land that your organization is on. So the next slide. So I'm going to start this conversation about Native psychological brilliance with an example. So we're going to show you a short video, and it's about, I think it's about maybe 4 minutes long, but I hope you enjoy it.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. Looks like we lost sound.
Hey, Bernice, are you sharing your screen?
Yeah, Bernice, this is Bernice's screen.
Oh, are we good?
Yeah, we didn't hear the last couple of minutes of the video.
Mhm.
Oh, no.
Yeah, I think you
Yeah.
accidentally muted yourself.
Oh, sorry about that. Do
Do you
you want to go back to it, or?
want to hear it again?
We have it in the, I can put it in the chat too.
Yeah, there's a link for it. It was interesting because it did, like, we probably heard the first minute and then it was silent.
Oh, no.
And I've seen it with it. Well, I've seen it, many times, and I love this video. And I'll tell you about it, but I never saw it without sound. So I was kind of mesmerized just watching her dance with sound. I saw different, I saw it in a different way. So, and I couldn't tell if it was just mine or not, but the link is there. You all can watch it. You can watch it again. It is, I think it's about 4 minutes, but if you don't know Christian Parrish, he's a really awesome, brilliant young Native guy. And he is, his professional name is Superman. And he's really well known, and especially of younger generations. And then the dancer, Akosia Red Elk, she's from Oregon. And I know these are not East Coast tribes necessarily, but it's just so brilliant in how they did that. And she didn't start dancing until she was like 16 or 17 years old. But you can click on the link and you can watch it again. You can watch the whole thing with the actual sound, but it's just an example of brilliance. And when I talked to Christian about it, the first time I saw this video, which I think he did in 2015 or 16, it was just incredible. And I said, how did you do that? And basically he just went out into the, up in Montana, and went out in the plains, and Acacia happened to be in town, and he asked her if she would participate in it with him, and she did, and that was it. Really an example of brilliance, and that's what I want to show it to you. So watch it again when you get a chance. It's only a few minutes. You'll really enjoy it. So the link will be there. And then maybe we put the link in the chat and you all can copy it if you want, because it'll be a while before you get it'll take a little while before you get the copy of the whole presentation. Okay, so let's just go on to the next slide. Here's what I believe. I believe that all Native young people are brilliant. I completely believe that. This video, when you hear it again, is an example of that. And that's actually Christian Parrish there in the top left. So the next slide is just about this concept of brilliance. So you know what brilliance means? It actually means excellence, conspicuous talent, great skill or intelligence, and mental ability. And I bet we all have somebody in our families or in our community that you know that you would consider brilliant. I'm really have always felt fortunate that I've worked with a lot of brilliant people, and I have a lot of people in my own family and my own tribe that I've always thought were just amazingly brilliant. But brilliance, shows in lots of different ways. It's not always educational achievement. There's lots of different kinds of brilliance. And, the other thing that brilliant means, like a brilliant star in the sky, it also means brightness of light. And I have in my life, and I bet you do too, somebody that you really admire, somebody you think is brilliant in whatever way they show that brilliance. And that really brings a lot of light to your life. So I just wanted to kind of take a second and talk about what brilliance means. So let's go to the next slide. But what can happen is my belief in Native brilliance is really strong. And I think it's in our DNA. I think we're born brilliant, but what happens and what can happen, doesn't always happen, but what can happen is life circumstances around us can squash down our brilliance, and it can squash down our self-esteem. And there's lots of reasons to that. And I say temporarily suppressed, that regardless of what our life circumstances are, that brilliance is still there. It's just got a lot of weight on top of it. So things like prejudice and racism against tribal communities and tribal people. Sometimes it's terrible. Sometimes it's subtle. Sometimes it's not there. But that is, if you experience racism, it can really weigh heavy on you. Trauma is another example of what can suppress innate brilliance that Native people have, whether that's an unexpected loss in your family or your community. I know, sadly, we've all lost a lot of people through COVID. Most of us have had some kind of experience with suicide in our communities, or, hopefully not, but maybe in our families. Even with overdose, the fentanyl being everywhere is so deadly, and people have no idea that what they are ingesting in a drug might, and often does nowadays, include fentanyl, which is just the tiniest speck, can result in a fatal overdose, accidental fatal overdose. So losses, that kind of trauma that comes from loss can really, it's one of those circumstances that can squash down a weight on your brilliance. Same thing with harassment and bullying, especially young children. If they're constantly being bullied, that really has, that's another weight on their innate brilliance. And the same thing with abuse, whether it's sexual abuse or verbal abuse, that kind of being in that kind of environment where especially a young person is constantly being constantly afraid, constantly not knowing exactly what to expect, being yelled at, being fearful, all of that has an impact on innate brilliance. Same thing with family breakup. Families break up for lots of reasons. Sometimes it's incarceration. Maybe a child is really close to their dad, but something happened and their dad ends up going away and is incarcerated for a while. Other reasons for family breakup, but all of that can really impact, suppress brilliance. Same thing with shame. Shame is a hugely powerful negative feeling that lives out in lots of different ways and can affect, suppress brilliance. Same thing with poverty. Being, I don't know about you all, but I was raised in what would be considered pretty poverty environment. Didn't really know we were that poor, but we were at times, and it not having what other kids can have, not being able to dress the way other kids could dress, all of that really has an impact on your self-esteem and your brilliance. And then one of the biggest things that I've seen in all my time and experience in working in tribal behavioral health is grief, unresolved grief. I think one of the most common undercurrents of people's not being in balance, having all kinds of challenges. When you peel a lot of that back, it's not surprising that it gets to unresolved grief. The loss of a parent too early, the loss of a friend, the loss of a favorite auntie or uncle, not being able to help them at the end, not being able to say what you've always wanted to say to them and now they're gone. anger about how they passed away, why they passed away. All of that can really result in a lot of unresolved grief that can be a really tough thing for young people. So the next slide talks a little bit more about unresolved trauma. So one of the things that happens that I've seen, and you probably have too, with people that are in pain with unresolved trauma, there's a lot of different ways that plays out in their behavior. For a lot of Native young people that I know, they'll retreat inward. They'll get even more quieter, more isolated. They can have self-doubt. They can harm themselves. People that cutters who cut on themselves are really in a lot of emotional pain. And excuse me one second here. Self-medicating, people who drift into substance use, doing anything to distract from the emotional pain that they're feeling. Some people get really angry and very rageful. And it, in the end, often it can result in conflicting kind of a love-hate relationship where you really love somebody. You love your mom, but you hate your mom because your mom didn't protect you. Or you love your dad, but you hate your dad because of whatever his behavior is that has upset the family. So unresolved trauma is huge. And I think it's pretty huge in Native communities, and it plays out in lots of different ways, but it's a weight on that innate brilliance. So the next slide is the upside of all this, that if you believe, as I believe, that Native people are brilliant, born that way in our DNA, if you think about historically all that Native people and your ancestors have been through, even think back before there was such a thing as the United States, before there was any kind of roads or towns or anything like that. There's a tremendous amount of brilliance and planning and strategy of tribal communities and tribal leaders moving camps, moving communities, organizing a community with different roles and different jobs, and packing everything up and moving to seasonally, looking at the stars for navigation. Tremendous amount of brilliance in our DNA. So if you believe, as I do, that that brilliance is always there, it just might be covered up by life circumstances, it can be affirmed, it can be fostered, it can help, you can unearth that and support that natural brilliance in people. And there's several ways that you can do that. One is to always assume strengths, first and foremost. You all might have had the great fortune, as I have, to travel around and go to different tribal communities and really see how a lot of different tribes live. But you also might see some tragedy in other tribal communities. I remember the first times that I was in different tribal communities that there would be a Native man kind of sitting on the street, looking pretty dejected and looking pretty, well, it's just unusual to see somebody sitting on the street or sitting on the side of the road. But when I see somebody like that, the first thing I think about is, I bet you that's a brilliant person. I bet you that person has a lot of stories to tell, a lot that people can learn from. I bet you that person is really brilliant. So I always try to assume strengths, and I've done it so long, it's like natural for me. So I don't see somebody that's sitting on the street or the side of the road and think, that's terrible, you know, that's a terrible person. I never think that. I always think, I bet you that's a brilliant person. I bet you they've done a lot of in their life in a good way. And right now, maybe they are in a place that they don't want to be, but I bet you they're brilliant. Bet you they have a lot of stories to tell. And so that's an example of assuming strengths. The same thing related to that is promoting stability. You know, not everybody's able to grow up in a family that's been intact and had the almost a luxury of kind of living in one place, you know, as they were raised. Some people have had that. A lot of Native people I know haven't. And that having to move around a lot, going to different schools all the time, that really is, can be a really scary thing for young people. But even if you're not able to have that kind of lasting stability in place, you can still promote stability and self-assurance to young people, young Native family members as you move. You can have the some objects that always stay with the family. You can have, you can be a present parent where you're reassuring. You can always promote stability, even if it doesn't mean being in one place, you know, your entire life. And some people do have that experience, being in one place, but I think a lot of people don't, but you can still promote stability. The other thing is acknowledging fear. It's natural to have fear. It's an instinct. It's important. But sometimes younger people are afraid, but they don't talk about it. They just kind of hold it inside. But if you're paying attention, you can see flinches. You can see their fear. You can see their behavior might be a little off. So acknowledging that fear, talking to people about, you know, you seem to really be kind of on edge, or you seem to be afraid, you know, can you tell me about that? That's really important. It gives someone who is afraid, for whatever reason, an outlet. And even if they don't say anything when you ask them, which is common, they know that you care, that you asked, and then they may come back around later. So acknowledging fear is really important as a way of affirming brilliance. And all of this list I'm talking about now are things that we can do to make sure that that pile on of life circumstances doesn't happen to young people. Supporting traditions is another thing that goes along with what I was saying about stability, whether that's your family tradition or tribal traditions. Having something consistent in people's lives, some kind of belief, some kind of activity. Maybe it's hunting at a certain time of year. Maybe it's having a garden every year and helping with that. Maybe it's the way people get together for a holiday. Having those kind of traditions is really important. And I can see how important it is. It gives young people, as they're growing up, something consistent that they can count on. And that all is a way to foster their brilliance. And of course, it kind of goes without saying that modeling behavior is really important. What you say, how you say it, the volume at which you say it, the caring of how you say it, and what you do as a caretaker or parent is really important. So, and you all know that, you know, people, especially Native young people, learn by watching more so than by talking. And then the other thing is just attention to balance. And I think I have an example of that. I'm going to show you in a second. But, you know, in other words, if we're able to help create as safe a place as possible for young people, that innate brilliance that they are born with will grow. All of this is to try to keep that heavy weight off of them as much as possible. So that's what I mean about affirming and fostering brilliance. So the next slide is, a lot of people talk about resilience, tribal resilience and tribal strengths, which is all true, definitely true. And there's lots of different ways that tribal people address different challenges that they encounter in tribal families. One of my friends, Terry Cross, has talked about this new, was not a new concept, but just the way he talks about it is new. When he talks about resilience, he talks about intentional resilience. So what he means by that is, for tribal people, we have a reservoir of resilience with us in our life experiences. And when we get into situations, life situations that overwhelm our capacity to cope, right now might be a good example with the hurricane and with COVID. I mean, those are unusual, almost bizarre circumstances that overwhelm anyone's normal ability to cope. But what Terry says about intentional resilience is he wants to remind tribal people that not to be overwhelmed, but to remember instead that we have like this basket of resilient experience with us all the time. And when we're in times of duress, we can reach into that basket and pull out strategies. We just have to be intentional about it. And that's where intentional resilience comes to play. So I was telling Terry that during the worst of COVID, and hopefully we're not in the worst again, but when it all first happened, and you all remember what that was like, and we all had to be inside and we couldn't see people, and it was very scary. Even if you went outside, everyone was just afraid of getting infected. It was like one of those movies that came true. It was just a really terrible time. And we also had to be inside all the time. So we weren't able to go, out. Even going to the grocery store was like I used to say when I would have to go and pick up a prescription, it was like taking my life in my hands to go into the pharmacy and stand there. So anyway, you all remember what that was like. But one of the things I was telling Terry that I started doing is I could go down the stairs of where I live, wouldn't take the elevator. I would go down the stairs and I could go to a door. I would go outside. And there's this beautiful walk in the area I live here, where I live. And it was a 3-mile kind of a circular walk I could do. It was never crowded. It was just really a beautiful walk. So I started doing that like almost every day. And it was just so great just to be outside, and I wasn't afraid because there was no one around me. And I never listen to music or anything when I do that. I just like to look around and look at houses as I walk by and look at trees and look at the leaves and just walk and take it all in. So I was doing that. And I still do that, but I was telling Terry about it as a passing conversation, and Terry says, that's intentional resilience. You have intentionally, and maybe you're not conscious of it, but you intentionally did something to balance yourself back out. And that was an example. So that's the Terry Cross words of wisdom there that I thought was a good example of intentional resilience. But there's other things that tribal people do. And this is a list of some of them, and you all probably could add to this list, but there's different ways that tribal folks have always done to help mitigate duress when things are really hard, when there's a lot of grief, when there's a lot of pain, when there's a lot of fear. Tribal communities tend to gather, and they tend to go to that basket of intentional resilience and do something to lessen that trauma. One of the things where I'm from in Oklahoma, there was such concern about our tribe not being able to gather, not being able to have our ceremonies. And one of the things that they wanted to put together is to have a drive-by cedar ceremony so that people could just drive by in their car and have safe distance during COVID environment, but they could actually smell the cedar smoke and how wonderful that was for people. Something to bring in the senses of comfort. So I just want to share that with you and share the story about intentional resilience. So the next slide is something super cool that I saw. This is from the Lummi Nation in Washington State. I used to be the behavioral health director for Lummi Nation. And they started this series, and I love it, the name of it. It's called Mental Sovereignty. Because, you know, we're always reclaiming our sovereign rights, whether it's land or water or fishing or whatever it might be. Our tribal leaders and our tribal attorneys are constantly vigilant, right, on sovereign issues. Well, this is mental sovereignty. And this is what I mean about native brilliance, regaining, reclaiming native psychological brilliance. And this is basically that I love this term of mental sovereignty. So what they're doing, it's a racial trauma support group for BIPOC, is Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And they do this 2 hours convening, and they have food during it. And it's like a support group. And you can see here at the top, it says many of the problems impacting their tribal community and Indigenous people have a historical context. Through the process of understanding the impact of historical and contemporary racial trauma, we become liberated to heal and return to wellness in our mental, physical, and spiritual lives. So the next slide is another example of what they're doing there in mental sovereignty, same group. But I like this, what they have at the top. This is for a different month. And again, they're doing these 2 hour sessions, gatherings. But the thing in the red is really cool. It says mental sovereignty is the undoing of the beliefs and behaviors that come from racial trauma. Undoing to me is like taking that weight off, right? That squashes brilliance. It is to take authority, to continue to break the cycle and believe in the power that we have. So I'm really thrilled that these guys are doing this. And I'm going to reach out to them and talk to them more about it. But I really like that concept of mental sovereignty. So you'll hear me talk about mental sovereignty a lot as my work continues. So the next slide I wanted to show you is another thing that's super important is important in the sense of balance and wellness, and that is a need to belong. I've been talking to quite a few people about this lately, that, well, number one, being tribal means belonging to something larger than yourself. You are a member of a tribe. You are a member of a tribal community. You're not just an individual person. But one of the things that gets complicated with people who are with providers, non-tribal healthcare or behavioral health providers, their training is in a medical model. Mental health providers, substance use providers, substance use treatment providers, medical providers, they are trained and they're credentialed in a medical model approach, which is a very individualistic approach. And there's great things that they do. There's wonderful things that they do, but their training can be a disconnect between the fuller cultural context of belonging, tribal belonging to something larger than yourself. So when a tribal patient comes in the door, it's not just that tribal one person. There could be a whole room full of ancestors in that same room that you can't see. There's much more to the that what looks like an individual patient, but there's so much more to them. And sometimes non-tribal providers who are trained in a medical model approach, which is individualistic, they don't fully understand that larger cultural context of tribal belonging. The other thing about the need to belong, you'll hear sometimes people say, and they're distressed. They'll say things like, I don't feel like I belong. I don't feel connected. And that can really be intensified in tribal communities by a couple of other things. One is by skin color. Tribal communities, I used to be married, my late husband was a Nanacoke tribal member from Southern Delaware, and I'm from Oklahoma. So I spent a fair amount of time, and my son, my only child, is half Nanacoke. And it was very interesting to me that, and sad in a lot of ways, that my late husband, who was fabulous, he was a mental health clinician, and he was really felt like he was discriminated against in his family, because in that particular family and other families that I know, because there's different kinds of ancestry in families, that they can, one family, same mother, same father, can have children that either look white or all the way to African American and everything in between because of the mix of ancestry. And so he told me a lot about racism and how skin color and texture of hair really played into this, do I belong or do I not belong? The other thing that happens is if you're raised in a tribal community or you're raised not in a tribal community, but you're a tribal person, that also kind of stirs up that do I belong, do I not belong thing. The same thing with higher education. In order to become credentialed and degree, people have to leave, usually, almost always, they have to leave where they were born and raised and go somewhere else and go to a university or whatever. And that also can create kind of a sad disconnect sometimes. The people in the community might think, well, that's, so-and-so's at a university and learned a different way. So that's another one that kind of fuels this feeling that I do belong, but I don't belong. The same thing with tribal membership. Are you a tribal member? Are you not a tribal member? All of that can all stir up the need to belong. And the reason I'm talking about that, can be one of those weights that squashes down brilliance. So, but sometimes it's the opposite. Sometimes it stirs up the fight in people and individuals and say, wait a minute, I am a tribal member. Even if I have some of these other points here, I'm a tribal member, period. And they get even stronger. So it can have the opposite effect of fueling brilliance, as well as with some people, it can kind of add some weight and squash down their innate brilliance. So the next slide is about purpose. So one of the things that I've seen that can really help foster and build on innate brilliance is a sense of purpose. If you don't have a sense of purpose, if you're just kind of hanging out, no sense of purpose, somewhat adrift, then that really can contribute to the opposite of brilliance squashing, as I call it. So a sense of purpose is really important because it means that you're valued. You have a job, you have a responsibility, you have a direction. You're part of a family, you're part of a tribe, and you're worthy, you're needed. That's what sense of purpose is about. If you don't have that, then you're vulnerable. You're vulnerable to be drifting into trying to find a sense of purpose somewhere else, and it may not be a healthy way. But one of the things that helps with sense of purpose in a family, let's say, is valuing individual strengths, because everybody has something they're good at. And if you figure out what that is, and it's not really hard to figure out, usually it's just paying attention, you can see that people have different strengths. And that can help find a sense of purpose if you pay attention to what people's strengths are. Even kids that are really young people who are really quiet, which is most of the Native young people I know, they're brilliant. They may not be saying anything, but they're thinking all the time. They have a lot of value and a lot of strengths. It may not look like it on the surface, but if you really pay attention, it's really pretty impressive. Their life experiences, their knowledge, their expertise of surviving or thriving in their community as a young person, they've got a lot of strengths. And the other way that some of that finding a sense of purpose can play out is in peer support roles. That's really a wonderful thing that's happening across the country and has been for a while, is peer support, formal peer support roles, lived experience. That really plays into, I think, another innate quality that Native people have is really wanting that, is that we really care. We care about other people. We want to help other people. It doesn't matter what situation that a Native person is in. If they have an opportunity to help another person, a Native person in particular, they'll do it. And that's where peer support roles come in. Those are jobs. So anyway, just want to say a couple of things about sense of purpose. And then the next slide is one of the things to pay attention to in making sure that that heaviness doesn't squash down innate brilliance is paying attention to balance. The spirit part, of course, is just whatever your beliefs are in your family, in your tribe, in your community. It could be organized church, it could be traditional practices, whatever it is, awareness of that, the value of that. And that also plays into stability. One of the things that tribal people I know that are Catholics, they like that ritual. They like that stability. They like going into a Catholic church and the services that they have. I'm not Catholic, but the services and the structure they have, they like that stability. So that's an important piece of people's balance, as well as keeping, the whole, mainly what we're talking about is about the mind, how important, number one, assuming that people are brilliant, and number two, doing everything to keep your mind clear and supported and clean. And that means, not going into substance use or anything that's going to affect your clarity. The other area about body is physical health. This is an area I think is so important, that just physical activity, just building that into your life as a natural, normal thing, watching what you eat, what you're putting into your body is really critical. My huge criticism that I have is in my hometown in Oklahoma is they put it's been there a long time now, but they put a Sonic drive-through hamburger place in this little bitty town. Number one, it's obnoxious looking, and it's been there a long time. But number two, that's where everybody goes. Everyone eats there all the time, so they're constantly eating really unhealthy food. And it plays out in their weight. It plays out in their diabetes, becoming diabetic. It plays out in a lot of different things. And I think that's something we should take back as Native people, our native food and being healthy and making that a normal part of our lives, because that's part of the balance. The same thing with community is, having a network of support and care. So I'm going to go on to the next thing, because I just want to tell you a couple of things about trauma-informed and healing-centered. So the next slide. So this is really interesting. So I just want to I have a couple of slides on this. And I know we're at 8:25 after the hour. So we don't have just a little bit of time left. But okay. Trauma-informed care, super important. Been around for a while, changes the focus from what's wrong with you, which is the old school way, which is very kind of condemning, to what happened to you, very supportive. So trauma-informed care is really important. It really changed the whole behavioral health field. But the thing about trauma-informed care to pay attention to, little yellow flag, is its individual focus. Trauma-informed care focus on the symptom. So there's a risk of the treatment focusing on the trauma, the incident or incidents. So there's a risk of trauma-informed care of being deficit-based. And one of the quotes that I heard from a young person is kind of a plea, where he said, "I am not just my trauma." A person of color, a young person of color. I'm not just my trauma. There's a whole bunch more to me. But the trauma-informed care tends to focus just on the trauma. So that's kind of something to pay attention to with trauma-informed care. There's another concept called healing-centered approach. So healing-centered is fascinating to me because it focuses on collective harm. What's happened to tribal people in general, in total, for example. And it considers the environmental context of the cause of the harm. So what's going on in the world? What's going on with public policy? What's going on with companies trying to take advantage of non-tribal companies trying to take advantage of tribal land? Why are there these terrible hamburger joints in tribal communities instead of healthy food places? So Healing Center focuses on all of that. And it gives an example of the pathology reduction does not mean health. And what that is saying is we all want people to be well and healthy and have their brilliance, shine. We're not providing service to them so they can be a little bit less miserable. So that's what that means. But healing-centered approach is kind of the next, I would like it to be the next iteration of trauma-informed care, because it really looks at it from a political perspective, as well as the trauma, the individual impact. So it focuses on broader conditions that contribute to well-being. So the next slide says a little bit more about it. So in a healing-centered approach, it's really a political approach. It really looks at that acknowledges that health and well-being is a function of control and power. So it's not just about helping that one person or one family move beyond their trauma. It really takes a bigger picture of like what's going on with this entire tribal community and what's going on with the, as the example, these mainstream companies, taking advantage of this, so it looks at things from a broader perspective, and that's what I like. It's very culturally grounded. The core to the Healing Center approach is that restoration of identity is a real fundamental issue. All that squashing down that happens helps people, it contributes to people not feeling strong as they want to be about being Native. Some people. It's also very asset driven, meaning strength based. Young people say that they're more than the worst thing that ever happened to them. In other words, yeah, some terrible trauma has happened to me, and I'm glad I'm getting some support for that, but I'm so much more than that, just that. And what you want to, it also focuses on what do you want to achieve instead of, so if you're working with a young person, instead of just treating the symptoms of trauma, you broaden that into what do you and your brilliance want to achieve, and how can I help you achieve that? So it's not just focusing just on symptoms of trauma. And then the last thing is that it also, Healing Center engagement really pays attention to the adult treatment provider, because the adult treatment provider also, I guess the point is that the healing is not just for the patients, that the adult also needs to pay attention to their own healing, their own reactions, their own life experiences. And does that, is there some pieces of that that are unresolved that might be impacting their ability to help others? So, but this is all from Sean Ginwright's work, who is just incredibly wonderful. I love reading his, and I put the source at the bottom. So if you want to look at that and read a little bit more about it, it's really interesting, because I think it's, I like the political, the broader context of it. Okay, so the last point I'm going to make, and then I have one little video I want to show you. Hopefully this will work. Is about healings. You can go one more slide back. So there's a Miwok man that I work with in California, and he and I were doing this presentation together, and we were talking about historical trauma, which everybody's, we've all heard historical trauma like 10,000 times, right? True, it's all true. But what we came to the conclusion of is that historical trauma is actually historical resilience. And that's the way we like to look at it. So if you go to the next slide. So I'm going to show you this one video, another example of Native brilliance. And this is only 2 minutes long, and it's really a wonderful, and it's a spoken word poet.
Darling, you were crafted from the finest things that this earth has to offer. The tan of your skin has surfaced from the purest grains that hold your feet. Your hair falls down your back as if water was tumbling down rock, but then settles. Darling, your fingers are flowers that are softer than any pain that tries to take hold of you. Your hands are power, and your limbs are rooted to your soul. They aren't meant to fall by your sides. They're meant to reach higher than any tree in sight. Darling, stand proud. Your head might be home to demons, but your heart is home to so much more. Find your heart, and just like the beat of a drum, let it make sound, because our ancestors didn't make drums to be silent. I know how hard it can be to feel like you are walking in darkness. But darling, there is only so much darkness until there is sun. And even when there is no sun, there is moon. So let that remind you that you are never walking alone in darkness. Our ancestors see you. And just like the air that we breathe, even when coldness hurts our lungs, we need you. Because you are life. Darling, you matter.
that is such a great example of native brilliance. I really love Tanchai. And if we go to the next slide, it says just a little bit about her. She's actually First Nations, and she is, so you have to go the other way. Go one more. There. So Tanchai, she she's awesome in 1,000 ways. An example of innate native brilliance, born brilliant. She and her brother founded this really cool group up in Canada called We Matter. It's, you can, well, that's the link there in blue, but it's the We Matter campaign.org. I think it's .org. And it's all one word. If you do a search for it, wemattercampaign.org. It's amazing. They basically, make a long story short, they lost a friend to suicide, and they were young. The brother and sister, they were, I don't know if they were teenagers, but they were in their early 20s, and they decided they were going to do something about it. They didn't have any money. They weren't an organization or anything like that. They said, you know what, we're young, we're smart, we're brilliant. We have cell phones, we know technology, we're going to create something. So they started this campaign called We Matter. I matter, you matter, we matter. And it was a cell phone campaign. So they got native people in Canada to record a message of hope. And they could do 1 minute, 2 minute, or 3 minute on their phone. So they did a little video recording, and then they could send it to We Matter campaign, and they would upload it. And it's incredible, and it took off like wildfire. We have thousands of these cool video shorts, and they're from young, other native teenagers, they're from tribal leaders, they're from aunties, they're from every walk of life. People have done these messages. So it's really cool, and she's really brilliant, and it's another.
Holly? Holly?
Of that. You can go to the next one. It's just letting you know that some upcoming sessions, and it says my internet's unstable, so I hope you can hear me. So there's a series that I've been doing for USET people as well, so you're welcome. And it's a lunchtime last Thursday of the month. We're doing 4 sessions, and the third one's coming up. If they're open to anybody, I use videos in those as well. And so the next one's September 30th. And then the one in October will be the final one of that series, and that is October 28th. So we'll send you an email about that. And then the last thing I wanted to mention is that we are working, I am working with USET in developing a tribal behavioral health echo series. And so we're working on the plans of that. And so that's going to be launched, and we'll be sure and let you know that. And then the last slide is just how to connect with me. So you can email me or you can call me directly. I'd love to hear from you. And that's all I have for you today. And I hope you guys have a really great day, and that you're safe, and that your families are safe. And thanks for listening this morning.